It wasn't supposed to be this way. The trip was meant to be routine, a simple research mission, a short flight to observe a distant planet and return home. But nothing went as planned. Our ship encountered a massive storm, a phenomenon that no one could have predicted. Before we knew it, we were crash landing on an isolated island in the middle of an unknown ocean. The worst part? I wasn't alone. When I woke up, disoriented and battered from the impact, I found myself on a beach. The sand was coarse and the sun harsh, burning down on my skin. As I took in my surroundings, it became clear that we had landed on a remote island, desolate, uncharted, and seemingly untouched by any form of civilization. But just as I started to grasp the severity of the situation, I saw her. Standing not far from the wreckage was a figure, tall and imposing. At first I thought I was hallucinating, but as my vision cleared, I realized the truth. She wasn't human. Her skin was a soft shade of deep violet, her eyes glowing with a strange intensity, and she wore what appeared to be warrior armor, a mix of alien metals and strange fabrics that shimmered in the sunlight. In her hand, she clutched a weapon unlike anything I had ever seen, a sleek blade that seemed to hum with energy. The tension was immediate. I had no idea where she came from or how she had ended up here. But one thing was clear. She wasn't just any alien. She was a warrior, and a dangerous one at that. For a few long moments, we stared at each other, neither of us speaking. I didn't know if she understood my language or if I could even trust her. But then, before I could say anything, she lowered her weapon. She seemed to assess me for a moment before speaking in a language I couldn't understand, her voice sharp and commanding. I tried to respond, but my words were jumbled. My mind was still reeling from the crash, and I was struggling to process everything. I had crash-landed on an island in the middle of nowhere, and now I was face to face with an alien warrior. She must have sensed my confusion because, after a few more attempts at communication, she pointed to the wreckage of the ship. Her gestures were clear. She wanted to help. But help with what? Surviving on this island? Or was she planning something else? Despite my uncertainty, I realized I had little choice. We were stranded together, and survival was now our only option. As we scavenged through the remains of the ship, it became clear that most of our supplies had been destroyed. Food, water, and medical equipment were either damaged or missing. We had to rely on our wits and whatever we could find on the island. Over the next few hours, we worked in silence. I scavenged what little I could, while she expertly moved through the wreckage, retrieving tools and weapons. Every movement she made was precise, like someone who had been trained for survival. I quickly realized that this warrior alien was no ordinary traveler. She was equipped with skills far beyond my own. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the beach, I found myself wondering what kind of world she came from. Who was she? Why was she here? And more importantly, could I trust her? When night fell, the air became cooler, and the sounds of the island began to change. Strange noises echoed from the dense jungle that bordered the beach. I could hear the distant cries of creatures I couldn't recognize, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. We were not alone on this island, and the thought sent a shiver down my spine. The alien girl, whom I had silently begun to refer to as the warrior, stood watch near the fire we had built. Her posture was tense, alert, as if she were expecting something to emerge from the shadows. I could tell that she had survived many battles, and she was ready for whatever was out there. But I wasn't ready. I was just an ordinary human, a scientist with no combat training and no survival experience. And yet, here I was, trapped on a deserted island with a warrior alien girl, facing dangers that neither of us could fully understand. As I sat near the fire, watching her keep guard, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Whatever this island held, it wasn't going to be easy, and if we wanted to survive, we would have to learn to trust each other. The second day on the island began with an uneasy silence. The warrior alien, still ever vigilant, had taken it upon herself to scout the perimeter of the beach while I gathered whatever scraps of supplies remained from the wreckage. As the sun climbed higher into the sky, casting its harsh light on the barren landscape, it became clear that survival here would be a battle. Against the elements, against the island's unknown dangers, and perhaps even against each other. Though we had not spoken much, there was a growing sense of unspoken understanding between us. She may have been alien, but survival did not require shared language, only shared purpose. Our communication remained simple: gestures, nods, and pointing. But over time, I began to grasp the basics of her intentions. After hours of silent cooperation, she motioned for me to follow her into the jungle. I hesitated. The jungle was thick with towering trees and vegetation I had never seen before, and the sounds coming from within were anything but comforting. But she seemed confident, her body language firm and unwavering. If there was one thing I had learned in the past 24 hours, it was that she knew what she was doing. With no other option, I followed her into the unknown. As we ventured deeper into the jungle, I quickly realized just how dangerous this island truly was. The air was thick with humidity, and the ground was uneven, covered in strange plants that seemed to move ever so slightly as we passed. There were creatures, too, shadowy figures lurking in the underbrush, their glowing eyes watching us from the darkness. Every now and then, I would catch a glimpse of something moving, a flash of scales or fur disappearing into the trees. But the warrior girl remained focused. She moved with the grace of a seasoned hunter, her weapon at the ready, her eyes scanning the surroundings for any signs of danger. I couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration for her. While I stumbled over roots and vines, she moved effortlessly, as if the jungle was her natural habitat. We walked for what felt like hours, deeper and deeper into the heart of the island, until we reached a clearing. There, in the middle of the jungle, stood a massive structure, ancient, crumbling, and overgrown with vines. It looked like a ruin from a forgotten civilization, one that had been abandoned long ago. The warrior girl stopped in front of the ruins, her eyes narrowing as she studied the structure. She gestured for me to stay back as she cautiously approached, her blade drawn and ready. I watched from a distance, my heart pounding in my chest, as she inspected the entrance. Suddenly, there was movement, a blur of motion from within the ruins. Before I could react, a massive creature emerged from the shadows, its eyes glowing with a fierce intelligence. It was unlike anything I had ever seen, a hybrid of reptilian and insect-like features, with armored scales and razor-sharp claws. The creature let out a deafening roar, and I froze in place, paralyzed by fear. But the warrior girl didn't hesitate. With a speed and precision that left me breathless, she lunged at the creature, her blade flashing in the sunlight. The battle that followed was a blur of motion, clashing weapons, growls, and the sound of steel against scales. The creature was fast, but the warrior girl was faster. She moved with a lethal grace, her strikes calculated and deadly. For a moment I thought she had the upper hand. But then, the creature struck back with its massive claws, sending her flying into the air. She landed hard, skidding across the ground, her weapon knocked from her hand. Panic surged through me. I didn't know what to do. I had no weapon, no combat training, nothing that could help her. But I couldn't just stand there and watch as she fought for her life. Before I knew it, I was running toward her, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't have a plan, I just knew I had to help. As I reached her, the creature was closing in, its claws raised for the final strike. But then, something unexpected happened. The warrior girl, injured and bleeding, looked up at me with a fierce determination in her eyes. She reached out and grabbed my arm, pulling me down beside her. In that moment, I realized she wasn't asking for help. She was giving me a weapon. In the heat of the moment, I barely had time to think. The warrior alien girl, battered from the battle, thrust a small blade into my hand, a weapon I had no idea how to use. I hesitated for a split second, my mind racing, but the creature was already upon us. Its snarling face loomed large, its glowing eyes filled with predatory intent. It was going to end us both if I didn't act. With no time to waste, I did the only thing I could. I charged. It was reckless, foolish even, but adrenaline had taken over, and all I could think about was stopping the beast before it tore us apart. I swung the blade wildly, not expecting much, but to my surprise, the creature recoiled, snarling in frustration as the weapon grazed its thick hide. That momentary distraction was all the warrior girl needed. With a fierce roar, she pushed herself to her feet, her body radiating with renewed strength. In one swift motion, she retrieved her fallen weapon and hurled it toward the creature's exposed side. The blade struck true, embedding itself deep in the creature's body. The beast let out a deafening roar, thrashing in pain, but it was too late. The warrior girl had already moved in for the final blow. With a single devastating strike, she brought the creature down. It collapsed to the ground, its massive body twitching as it took its final breath. The jungle fell silent once more, save for the heavy sound of our breathing as we both stood there, staring at the fallen beast. I couldn't believe what had just happened. I had never fought anything in my life, let alone a monstrous creature from some alien ecosystem. But somehow, against all odds, we had survived. The warrior girl turned to me, her breathing heavy, her violet eyes glowing faintly in the dim light of the jungle. There was no anger in her gaze, only a quiet acknowledgement of what had just transpired. "You saved me," I managed to say, still trying to catch my breath. She didn't respond with words, at least not in a language I could understand. But her expression softened, and she gave me a small nod of gratitude. For the first time since we had met, I realized that we were more than just reluctant allies. We were partners now, bound by the necessity of survival. Once the immediate danger had passed, we took a moment to assess our situation. The ruins we had stumbled upon were more than just old stones and forgotten history. They held secrets, dangerous ones, no doubt, but possibly also valuable resources. The warrior girl seemed to recognize the importance of the place. She gestured toward the entrance of the ruins, her expression serious. She wanted to go inside. I hesitated. After the battle with the creature, the last thing I wanted to do was venture deeper into the unknown. But I also knew that we couldn't survive on the island without taking risks. If there was anything of use inside those ruins, supplies, tools, or even shelter, it could mean the difference between life and death. Reluctantly, I agreed, and together we approached the entrance. The air inside the ruins was cool and heavy with the scent of damp stone. The walls were covered in strange symbols, alien markings that I couldn't decipher. The warrior girl, however, seemed to recognize them. She ran her fingers along the carvings, her eyes narrowing in concentration. It was as if she was searching for something. As we ventured deeper into the ruins, the sense of unease that had been lingering in the back of my mind grew stronger. The ruins were ancient, and though they had been abandoned for who knows how long, there was a strange energy in the air. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone, and I was right. It didn't take long for us to realize that the island wasn't just home to dangerous creatures. There were traps here too. Old, but still functional. The warrior girl narrowly avoided triggering one when a hidden panel in the floor shifted beneath her foot. She reacted quickly, pulling me back just as a series of razor-sharp spikes shot up from the ground. I stared at the trap in shock, my heart racing. "We need to be more careful," I muttered, though I knew she couldn't understand me. Still, the sentiment was clear enough. From that point on, we moved cautiously, carefully avoiding any suspicious-looking panels or loose stones. The warrior girl led the way, her sharp instincts guiding us through the maze of corridors. It was clear that she had been trained for this kind of thing: survival, combat, and the art of staying alive in dangerous environments. I, on the other hand, was simply trying to keep up. The deeper we ventured into the ruins, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The silence was deafening, broken only by the soft echo of our footsteps and the occasional distant rumble of something shifting within the stone walls. The warrior girl remained ever vigilant, her weapon always at the ready, her eyes scanning every shadow for potential threats. I, on the other hand, could barely keep my fear in check. Each room we passed through seemed to tell a story, though it was one I couldn't fully understand. The alien markings on the walls became more elaborate the further we went, and occasionally we would come across strange artifacts, tools, sculptures, and remnants of a civilization long forgotten. I wondered if the warrior girl knew what this place was, if she had any connection to the ancient beings who had once lived here. But she remained silent, focused on the task at hand. As we moved through the ruins, we encountered more traps, hidden pits, collapsing ceilings, and more of those deadly spikes that seemed to spring up out of nowhere. The warrior girl navigated them with ease, but I struggled to keep pace. More than once, she had to pull me out of harm's way, saving me from certain death. It became clear that, Without her, I wouldn't have lasted more than a few minutes in this place. Eventually, we reached a large chamber at the heart of the ruins. The air here was colder, and the light that filtered in through the cracks in the ceiling cast eerie shadows across the room. At the center of the chamber stood a massive, intricately carved stone pedestal, and on top of it lay something that took my breath away. It was a device, an alien artifact, unlike anything I had ever seen before. It glowed faintly, emitting a soft hum that reverberated through the air. The warrior girl's eyes widened as she approached it, her expression a mix of awe and caution. She seemed to recognize its significance, though I had no idea what it was. As she reached out to touch the device, something in the room shifted. The ground trembled beneath our feet, and I heard a low, rumbling sound that seemed to come from the walls themselves. It was as if the ruins were reacting to our presence, as if we had triggered something by disturbing the artifact. Suddenly, the walls around us began to close in. Panic surged through me as I realized what was happening. The chamber was collapsing, and we had only seconds to escape. The warrior girl, her instincts kicking in, grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the exit. We ran, dodging falling debris and leaping over collapsing sections of the floor as the ruins crumbled around us. The adrenaline coursing through my veins kept me moving, but I knew I wouldn't make it far without her. The warrior girl was faster, stronger, and far more capable than I could ever hope to be. She led the way, guiding us through the maze of corridors with a speed and precision that left me in awe. We barely made it out. Just as the entrance to the ruins collapsed behind us, we tumbled out onto the jungle floor, gasping for breath. My heart was pounding in my chest and my muscles burned from the exertion. But we were alive. Somehow, against all odds, we had survived. As I lay there staring up at the sky, I couldn't help but laugh, partly out of relief, partly out of disbelief. This whole situation was absurd. I had crash-landed on a deserted island, been hunted by alien creatures, nearly died in a collapsing ruin, and was now lying next to an alien warrior girl who had saved my life more times than I could count. The warrior girl, sitting beside me, didn't laugh. Instead, she looked at me with a strange intensity, as if trying to figure me out. There was something in her gaze that I couldn't quite decipher, an unspoken question, perhaps, or a sense of curiosity. Whatever it was, I could tell that she was no longer viewing me as a burden, as a weak human in need of protection. We had just faced death together, and in doing so, we had become partners in survival. The island, though still full of danger, no longer seemed as insurmountable as it had before. We had faced its challenges and emerged victorious. But I knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. There were still so many unknowns, so many mysteries to unravel. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow across the jungle, the warrior girl stood and offered me her hand. I hesitated for a moment before taking it, feeling the strength of her grip as she pulled me to my feet. Together, we made our way back to the beach, where the wreckage of our ship still lay. The fire we had built the night before was little more than glowing embers, but it was enough to keep the cold night air at bay. We sat in silence, staring out at the ocean as the waves gently lapped at the shore. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time since the crash, I felt a glimmer of hope. The next morning, the island greeted us with an uneasy calm. The jungle, which had once seemed like an endless stretch of danger, was quieter than it had been before. It was as if the island itself was giving us a brief reprieve from its constant threats. But I knew better than to let my guard down. We had barely survived the day before, and there was no guarantee that the island's creatures or traps wouldn't strike again. The warrior alien girl, whom I had mentally started calling Nyx, though I had no idea what her real name was, seemed to share my wariness. She was already awake by the time I stirred, her violet eyes scanning the horizon as she sharpened her weapon with a precision that came from years of training. I marveled at her focus, her ability to adapt to our harsh environment without missing a beat. She was a survivor in every sense of the word, and I was quickly coming to realize just how lucky I was to have her as an ally. After a quick, silent breakfast of the few remaining rations we had salvaged, Nyx gestured for me to follow her once more. It seemed that she had no intention of staying put on the beach, not when there were more resources to be found deeper inland. Part of me wanted to argue, to suggest that we fortify our position and wait for rescue, but I knew that was wishful thinking. No one was coming for us, and the only way we were going to survive was by being proactive. Reluctantly, I followed her into the jungle once again. The day was spent exploring more of the island, though this time we were more cautious. Nyx moved with the same grace and precision as before, but I noticed that she was no longer just looking for dangers. She was searching for something. What exactly, I couldn't tell. Perhaps she was looking for a way off the island, or maybe she was trying to find answers about where we were. Either way, it was clear that she had a plan. By midday, we stumbled upon a new discovery, a series of caves hidden within a cliffside. Unlike the ruins from the day before, these caves didn't seem man-made. They were natural formations, but there was something strange about them. The entrance was wide and dark, and the air that flowed from within was cool and damp, carrying with it the faint scent of minerals and moisture. Nyx approached the cave cautiously, her weapon drawn. I followed her lead, though every instinct in me screamed to stay outside. The island had already proven to be full of surprises, and I wasn't eager to face whatever might be lurking inside the dark depths of the cave. But Nyx didn't hesitate. She entered the cave with the same quiet confidence she had displayed since the moment I met her, and I had no choice but to follow. The inside of the cave was surprisingly spacious, with high ceilings and smooth walls that glistened faintly in the dim light. The deeper we went, the more I began to notice strange markings on the walls, symbols similar to the ones we had seen in the ruins. It was clear that the island had once been inhabited by a civilization far more advanced than I had originally thought. Nyx seemed particularly interested in these markings, studying them closely as we moved deeper into the cave. Every now and then she would stop and trace her fingers over the symbols, her brow furrowing in concentration. I wondered if she was trying to decipher their meaning, but if she understood anything, she didn't share it with me. As we ventured further into the cave, I began to hear strange noises, soft, echoing sounds that seemed to come from the very walls themselves. At first, I thought it was just the natural acoustics of the cave, but then I realized something chilling. We were not alone. Before I could react, Nyx froze in place, her hand shooting up in a silent signal for me to stop. I obeyed immediately, my heart pounding in my chest as I strained to hear what had caught her attention. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, a low growl echoed from the darkness ahead. My blood turned to ice. Without warning, a massive shape emerged from the shadows. It was another creature, similar to the one we had encountered in the ruins, but this one was even larger, more ferocious. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and its scales shimmered in the dim light of the cave. It let out a deafening roar, and before I could react, it lunged toward us. Nyx was ready. In one fluid motion, she drew her weapon and charged at the creature, her movements a blur of speed and precision. The battle that followed was chaotic and brutal. The creature was fast, but Nyx was faster. She dodged its attacks with ease, her blade flashing as she struck at its vulnerable points. But this time, the fight was different. This time, I didn't stand on the sidelines. There was no time to think, only time to act. The creature's growl echoed through the cavern as it lunged at us, and while Nyx was already engaged in battle, something within me snapped into action. I wasn't just a helpless bystander anymore. This was life or death, and I had to do my part. I scrambled to find something, anything, that could serve as a weapon. My eyes landed on a jagged piece of rock lying on the ground, and without hesitation, I grabbed it, my hands trembling as I clutched it tightly. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. The creature's massive form moved with terrifying speed, its claws swiping through the air as it tried to corner Nyx. She dodged each attack with a grace that left me in awe, her violet eyes glowing with a fierce intensity as she expertly wielded her blade. But the creature was relentless, and I could see that even Nyx was beginning to tire. That's when I saw my chance. As the creature turned its attention to Nyx, I crept around to its side, the jagged rock still clutched in my hand. My heart was pounding in my chest, my breath coming in ragged gasps, but I knew this was my only opportunity to help. I had to be fast. I had to be precise. With a surge of adrenaline, I lunged forward. driving the rock into the creature's side with all the strength I could muster. The creature let out a deafening roar of pain, its body twisting as it tried to shake me off. But I held on, my grip tightening as I pushed the rock deeper into its flesh. The distraction was all Nyx needed. With a fierce battle cry, she leaped into the air, her blade flashing as she brought it down on the creature's exposed neck. There was a sickening crunch as the blade connected, and for a brief moment, the creature froze in place, its glowing eyes wide with shock. Then, with one final, pitiful growl, it collapsed to the ground, its massive body twitching before going still. The cave fell silent once more. I stood there, panting, my hands trembling, as I let the jagged rock fall to the ground. My heart was still racing, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. We had done it. We had killed the creature. Nyx, standing over the fallen beast, turned to me with a look of approval. There was no need for words, her expression said it all. For the first time since we had met, I felt like I had earned her respect. I wasn't just a liability anymore. I was a partner, someone she could rely on. As the adrenaline began to fade, I collapsed against the cave wall, my legs shaking from exhaustion. Nyx joined me a moment later, sitting beside me as we both caught our breath. The silence between us was comfortable, almost peaceful. We had survived another trial, and for the first time I felt a glimmer of hope that we might actually make it off this island alive. After a few minutes, Nyx stood and gestured for me to follow her deeper into the cave. Reluctantly, I pushed myself to my feet, my muscles protesting with every movement. I didn't know what else we would find in these caves, but I trusted Nyx's instincts. If she thought there was something valuable here, I wasn't going to question her. As we ventured further into the cave, the air grew colder, and the strange markings on the walls became more elaborate. It was clear that this place had once been important to someone, perhaps even the same ancient civilization that had built the ruins we had explored the day before. Eventually, we reached a small chamber at the very back of the cave. There, sitting on a pedestal made of smooth stone, was an object unlike anything I had ever seen before. It was a small, glowing sphere, no larger than a grapefruit, and it pulsed with a soft blue light. Nyx's eyes widened as she approached the sphere, her hand trembling slightly as she reached out to touch it. The moment her fingers brushed against its surface, the sphere emitted a low hum, and the light intensified, filling the chamber with a soft, ethereal glow. I watched in awe as the sphere seemed to respond to Nyx's touch, its light pulsing in time with her heartbeat. It was clear that this object was important, perhaps even the key to something greater. Nyx turned to me, her expression serious. Though I couldn't understand her words, I could sense the urgency in her voice as she spoke. Whatever this sphere was, it held the answers we had been searching for. And now, with it in our possession, I knew that our journey was far from over. With the glowing sphere in Nyx's hands, we retreated from the cave and made our way back toward the beach. The air outside felt warmer, almost welcoming compared to the cold, damp confines of the cave. But even as we left the shadows behind, the weight of the discovery lingered between us. The sphere pulsed gently in her grip, its soft light illuminating the path as we walked. I had no idea what it was, whether it was some kind of ancient relic, a source of power, or something else entirely. But I could tell from the way Nyx held it, with a mixture of reverence and caution, that it was important. Perhaps it was the reason we had been brought to this island in the first place. Or maybe it held the key to our survival. The thought of leaving the island no longer seemed as impossible as it once had. But the challenges were far from over. We were still stranded, still without a clear way to signal for help, and still at the mercy of the island's many dangers. But the sphere offered hope. Hope that we might find a way out of this, that there was a purpose behind everything we had endured. As we reached the beach, I glanced out at the horizon, where the wreckage of our ship still lay scattered across the sand. It was a stark reminder of how far we had come, and how far we still had to go. The island had tested us, pushing us to our limits, but it hadn't broken us. That night, as we sat by the fire, I found myself reflecting on the journey so far. I had crash-landed on this island as a stranger, lost and scared, with no idea how to survive. And yet, here I was, alive and stronger than I ever thought possible. Nyx had been a crucial part of that. Her skills, her instincts, and her unwavering determination had kept us both alive. But more than that, we had formed a bond. A bond built on trust, forged in the fires of survival. It was strange, in a way. Nyx was an alien, someone I never would have met under normal circumstances. And yet, in the midst of this dangerous, isolated place, she had become the most important person in my life. We didn't need words to understand each other anymore. Our actions spoke louder than anything else. As the fire crackled and the stars twinkled overhead, I glanced at Nyx. She was sitting across from me, her violet eyes reflecting the flames as she studied the glowing sphere in her hands. She looked peaceful, almost content, despite everything we had been through. For a moment, I wondered what her life had been like before all this. Was she part of a larger mission? Was she searching for something or someone before she ended up here? There were so many questions I wanted to ask, but I knew that now wasn't the time. We still had a long way to go, and survival was our top priority. As the night wore on, Nyx eventually placed the sphere in a small pouch at her side, securing it carefully before lying down to rest. I followed suit, exhaustion finally catching up with me as I lay back on the cool sand. But sleep didn't come easily. My mind was still racing, filled with thoughts of the creatures we had encountered, the traps we had narrowly avoided, and the mysteries of the island itself. Every instinct told me that there was more to this place than we had uncovered. More secrets hidden in the jungle, waiting to be revealed. And then there was the sphere. What was it? Why had it been hidden in the depths of the cave? And why did it seem to resonate so strongly with Nyx? Whatever the answers were, I knew they would come in time. But for now, all I could do was close my eyes and hope that tomorrow would bring us closer to understanding. The island was dangerous, unpredictable, and full of surprises. But we had faced its challenges together, and we had survived. And as I drifted off to sleep, I knew that no matter what lay ahead, we would continue to face whatever the island threw at us, together. The days that followed were filled with a sense of purpose. With the sphere now in our possession, it felt as if we had uncovered a piece of the island's greater mystery. Though what that mystery was, we still didn't know. Nyx remained focused, her eyes always scanning the horizon, her movements deliberate and calculated. She was searching for something, that much was clear. Whether it was a way off the island or answers to the island's strange phenomena, I couldn't say for certain. But I trusted her. She hadn't led us wrong so far. Our routine became a rhythm of survival, gathering resources, fortifying our camp, and exploring the island further. Each day brought new discoveries, new challenges, and with them, new opportunities to grow closer. The more time we spent together, the more I realized just how much we had come to rely on each other. Nyx's strength and skill were unmatched, but she also had a quiet intelligence about her, a sharp mind that constantly assessed and recalculated the best course of action. I, on the other hand, had learned to adapt. I wasn't a warrior like her, but I was no longer the helpless human I had been when we first crashed. I had learned to think like a survivor, to anticipate danger, and to trust my instincts. And through it all, I had learned to trust her, implicitly. One evening, after another long day of exploration, we returned to our camp with a sense of weariness that only came from days spent in constant vigilance. The island had a way of sapping our energy, of testing our resolve, but it hadn't broken us. As we sat by the fire, eating what little food we had managed to gather, I noticed something different in Nyx's demeanor. She was quieter than usual, her gaze distant as she stared into the flames. I didn't need words to know that something was weighing on her mind. After a few moments of silence, she reached for the glowing sphere, which she had kept safely secured in her pouch since the day we had found it. She held it in her hands, her fingers tracing the smooth surface as it pulsed softly in the dim light. I watched her closely, sensing that she was on the verge of saying something important. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she looked up at me, her violet eyes filled with a quiet intensity. She spoke in her language, a language I still couldn't fully understand, but her tone was different this time. It wasn't the commanding tone of a warrior or the cautious voice of someone on alert. It was something softer, something more vulnerable. Though I couldn't decipher her words, I understood the sentiment behind them. She was telling me about her past. In that moment, I realized that Nyx wasn't just a warrior. She was someone with a history, with her own struggles and challenges. She had been through battles long before we had met on this island, and those battles had shaped her into the person she was now. But the island had changed her too. It had tested her in ways that went beyond physical survival. It had forced her to rely on someone else, on me. And in doing so, it had forged a bond between us that neither of us had anticipated. As she spoke, I listened intently, nodding in understanding even though I couldn't grasp the details of her story. And in return, I told her my own story, about my life before the crash, about the ordinary world I had left behind, and about the person I had become since we landed on this strange island. Our conversation lasted long into the night, and though there was still so much we couldn't say to each other with words, it didn't matter. We had found a way to communicate that transcended language, a connection built on trust, on shared experiences, and on the understanding that we were in this together. As the fire died down and the stars twinkled overhead, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The island was still full of dangers, and our future was uncertain, but for the first time, I felt like we had a real chance at survival. We were no longer just two strangers stranded on an island. We were partners. We were survivors. And together, we would face whatever challenges lay ahead.